Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Why Use Add-ins with SharePoint and SharePoint Online. Add-ins are becoming the default choice for software development, and Microsoft is encouraging its partners to develop add-ins to improve the ecosystem of applications, specifically for Office 365. Managing unstructured and semi-structured content has always been a challenge and has increased in complexity in both standalone and hybrid environments. Concept Searching's SharePoint platforms are now available as add-ins, providing significant advantages to existing and future customers. This webinar will enable you to gain an in-depth understanding of add-ins and their benefits. This is Steve Mann, Vice President of Sales at Concept Searching, and I will be your host for today's webinar. So our agenda, today we will kick off with a bit about concept searching, who we are, what we do. We will then turn to add-ins. Areas to be explored include what types of add-ins are available, why the increasing trend for add-ins, characteristics of add-ins, how this development approach improves technical and business processes, when the use of add-ins should be considered rather than a SharePoint application, and the justification for this type of approach and the potential benefits. We will wrap up. We ought to have some time to answer questions. And if you do have questions during the webinar, please type them into the chat box. We'll be sure to follow up with a response regardless if we have or have not answered your question during the course of the webinar or in the question portion. And finally, we're looking to wrap up this webinar in 50 minutes, so those of you who have scheduled meetings at the bottom of the hour will have time to make your next engagement. And just be advised, we will be recording this webinar and we'll send all registrants a link to the recording and a link to the presentation. So on with the show. So for those of you who may not be familiar with concept searching, we've been in business since 2002. We were the first to market with a solution to automatically apply semantic metadata, and we're the only vendor who can extract conceptual metadata based on a statistical analysis of an organization's content. We've been a managed Microsoft partner since 2008, and we're one of only 11 search partners worldwide who is a Microsoft Business Critical SharePoint program partner. Our product platforms deliver metadata-driven search and governance solutions for all versions of SharePoint on-premise, as well as all versions of SharePoint Online, the multi-tenant, the older dedicated version, and the government cloud, as well as OneDrive for Business. So what we do is metadata generation, auto-classification, taxonomy, and term store management. And as mentioned, we integrate with all versions of SharePoint, on-premise, in the cloud, or hybrid environment. Our platform is not a web part, but an infrastructure platform that offers the flexibility to access content in non-SharePoint platforms and repositories. So once you've automated the process of generating metadata and tagging content, that metadata can be used for a whole host of interesting things. Data privacy, records management, compliance, text analytics, which we like to refer to collectively as intelligent metadata-enabled solutions. All right, I think since the advent of metadata, organizations have tried to certainly leverage metadata to manage content. I think there's little doubt that it can be very valuable in that regard. I think the downfall is typically due to an over-reliance on the end-user population to manually tag content. And for the reasons listed here, manual tagging typically leads to failure. Still, organizations continue to rely on manual tagging, probably because there is no perceived upfront cost. The most obvious adverse impact is to enterprise search, as improving findability is the main reason organizations turn to metadata in the first place. Now, with the cloud and the exponential growth of content, the consequences of inaccurate metadata are more severe, having an adverse effect on critical business issues. So really it all starts with search, and search is the root of any type of information governance. So, poor search can mean poor records management, migration, compliance, security, content lifecycle management, e-discovery, text analytics, and the list goes on. So probably none of you need to be told about the proliferation of content. The cloud, however, has opened a Pandora's box of problems associated with security, enforcement of policy across different environments, compliance, and more complicated environments. The SharePoint Office 365 world is changing rapidly. Some good, some not so good. In either case, if you are committed to SharePoint, Office 365, or both, you need to leverage tools provided by Microsoft and by vendors who can solve a business problem. So I'm going to give you a little bit more of a graphic illustration for for the business impact of poor metadata. As I mentioned, it all really starts with search. And I'm not going to kind of read to you that this is something that, again, if you want to look at this more closely, you can download the presentation later. But again, search leads to compliance issues, e-discovery, data breaches, records management issues, migration problems, content lifecycle management challenges. Again, compliance and audit. If you're a company that does business abroad, there's international laws that can cause other compliance issues. Collaboration, or the inability to collaborate. Being able to share knowledge across silos. And finally, text analytics. So really, to summarize all these graphics, they represent lost revenues resulting from inconsistent and inaccurate metadata that has driven poor decision making and unproductivity. Right now I'd like to mention one of Concept Searching's key differentiators, our compound term processing engine, which is still a unique deliverable in the industry. So traditional search assumes the end user knows what they're looking for, or must enter the right combination of words to get the right result. Knowledge workers need to identify content in the context of what they're seeking. The fundamental problem with search solutions is that they're based on an index of single words. Yet most queries are expressed in short patterns of words and not single words in isolation, which can be highly ambiguous. So in the example here, a search engine relying on keywords would identify all the documents that contain the words triple, heart, and bypass, instead of documents that contain the concept of triple heart bypass. Now, since the concept has been identified, other documents that have related concepts will then be identified, even if they do not contain that exact phrase. So examples could be search results for coronary surgery, heart attack, stroke, etc. All right, let's move on to add-ins. So Microsoft is encouraging the use of add-ins for Office 365 and SharePoint. And the good news is they do provide tangible business benefits. So although someone has to develop and build the add-in, the end result can justify the investment. So all SharePoint add-ins are self-contained pieces of functionality that you write to extend the capabilities of SharePoint websites to solve well-defined business problems. Add-ins do not have custom code that runs on the SharePoint servers. Instead, all custom logic moves up to the cloud, down to client computers, or over to an on-premise server that is outside the SharePoint farm or SharePoint Online subscription. Now, keeping custom code off SharePoint servers provides reassurance to your SharePoint administrators that the add-in can't harm their servers or reduce the performance of their SharePoint Online websites. Business logic in a SharePoint add-in can access SharePoint data through one of several client APIs included in SharePoint. Which API you use for your add-in depends on certain other design decisions you make. Almost all major types of SharePoint components can be part of a SharePoint add-in, including pages, lists, workflows, custom content types, list templates, web parts, and more. The SharePoint websites where SharePoint add-ins are installed and from which users launch them are called host webs. The SharePoint components, however, are generally in a special child web of the host web called the add-in web. SharePoint add-ins can fit into a SharePoint website in several ways. As an immersive full-page experience, as part of a web page, using a special kind of control called an add-in part to the SharePoint add-in, and as user interface commands that extend ribbons and menus. All SharePoint add-ins that users install get a tile on the site contents page of the SharePoint website, and clicking the tile runs the add-in. A SharePoint add-in is configured using an add-in manifest, an XML file that declares the add-in's basic properties, where it runs, what SharePoint should do when the add-in starts. Among other things, the manifest can specify what languages the add-in supports, what SharePoint services and functionality it depends on, and the permissions to the host web that the add-in needs. You distribute SharePoint add-ins in add-in packages that always include at least the add-in manifest. If the add-in has SharePoint components in an add-in web, these are included in the package as a set of XML files. Remote components that are hosted outside of SharePoint, such as remote web application or database, are not included in the package and are deployed separately from the add-in package. However, the add-in manifest does specify the URLs of the remote components. Now, add-in packages can also include Office add-ins. When the SharePoint add-in is installed, the Office add-in is added to an Office add-ins catalog in SharePoint. Users can install it from the catalog into the Office applications like Word or Excel. Why consider add-ins? Well, SharePoint Online, Office 365 does not support farm models. So if you have a farm model, you need to start planning on alternatives. What does an add-in buy you? Well, it greatly reduces the risk of impacting the performance of SharePoint farms. So I guess in concert, improves the stability and reduces operational cost of the SharePoint server farms. You can scale out the application without scaling out the entire SharePoint server farm. Add-ins do not require dedicated farms for customizations due to application isolation. And add-ins do not require downtime for SharePoint to deploy updates. It also allows for more flexibility, for more flexible deployment platforms. So these are tangible value propositions that add-ins have. Other advantages: allows customers and system integrators to leverage standard web development skills over much harder to obtain SharePoint development skills that have been traditionally employed. Add-ins will run in both SharePoint Server and SharePoint Online. Gives administrators the safest SharePoint extensions. Can integrate cloud-based resources in simplified and more flexible ways. And enables you to use cross-platform standards. Also enables you to take advantage of the SharePoint cross-domain JavaScript library to access SharePoint data. Alternatively, you can use a Microsoft-provided secure token service that is OAuth compatible, or use digital certificates to get authorization to SharePoint data. So conceptClassifier for SharePoint is configured as a SharePoint provider hosted add-in. The TreeView control that implements term set browsing for SharePoint is a SharePoint hosted add-in. Support for these add-in technologies has been added by Microsoft to SharePoint 2013 and 2016, so no need for customers to buy anything. And conceptClassifier add-ins support SharePoint 2013 and will support SharePoint 2016, however not available in SharePoint 2010. Okay, traditionally we've provided very broad overviews of how conceptClassifier works. We have gotten some questions from people on that maybe if we could focus a little more on how actually our solution works. So the next few slides illustrate some of the processes conceptClassifier performs to identify and collect multi-term metadata. So this slide shows the SharePoint site detection and collection process. Concept searching supports the registration of a top-level SharePoint site. The site may or may not have many child sites. Each of these may also have additional children. Once the site has been registered, the collector site, the collector service, will begin the process of spanning the SharePoint hierarchy. This follows the following steps by using a combination of SharePoint's REST APIs and the SharePoint client's context. So identify the root site information. Identify root web child sites. Recursively iterate over the detected child sites, identifying any further child sites. Iterate over all the detected sites, identifying SharePoint lists and document libraries. And iterate over all the detected lists, identifying SharePoint list items and documents. This graphic depicts the flow of document collection. During detection, the collector will sometimes be observed jumping between individual document collection and hierarchy detection. This is to improve efficiency by best using the caches of data available, while also attempting to not allow the caches to grow too stale or large. Now, this is achieved by concentrating on collecting documents or list items that are in the same list or subweb prior to moving on to another subweb or list. The basic flow of document collection is shown here. In an ideal first collection scenario, both the item's metadata and ACLs will be found within the existing concept searching caches. This means that the final query is made simply as an HTTP GET request to the document. If, however, the cache does not contain the item's metadata, then it will be requested as normal alongside the document content. This graphic illustrates document interactions when content is added, updated, or deleted. Once sites are registered and an initial crawl has been completed, we maintain an up-to-date index using two methods. Proactive, asynchronous event receivers from SharePoint notify the core services that changes or additions to a SharePoint site have been made. Regular, and by regular this can mean nightly, reindexing occurs to identify documents that have been added, changed, or removed. This is to ensure that any updates missed due to downtime of either SharePoint or the concept searching server are identified. The events are registered via the conceptClassifier for SharePoint product and cover the following events: item added, item updated, item checked out, item checked in, and item deleted. This shows how the various components interact off the back of user events with the following key elements interacting with each other. This graphic explores the concept taxonomy workflow process, which is a tool that is very valuable to our customers. It's a component that sits as an add-on to the main classification process, and enables an administrator to produce complex document workflows off the back of any supported classification, such as metadata-based clues, natural language clues, phonetic clues, regular expressions. So in particular, the SharePoint integration offers the following functionality out of the box: document migration to SharePoint from any supported sources, pushing static or dynamic values to SharePoint fields, changing content types, as well as virtually anything else with a custom workflow plugin. So this shows how workflows are processed, with the list of workflows for a document or source being iterated through, checked for matches against the document's classifications, and then processed where necessary. Migrations to SharePoint make use of SharePoint support for HTTP verbs. We download the raw document from the source environment, then push it to SharePoint using the put HTTP verb. This ensures compatibility with the various versions of SharePoint. Once the document has been uploaded, any additional updates to the document, such as copying metadata from the source or pushing static values into the new document, are completed using SharePoint's client context. Okay, so now let's see how the add-ins work. So here we're looking at SharePoint Office 365. This is the root site collection, and this shows how the app is added to this particular site collection. So we're going to select choose and add an app. We choose an app and we just confirm that we trust this app. And there we are. So it's adding the app. It just takes a moment or two to do that. And once we've done that, we're ready to get started with configuring SharePoint to perform auto classification. And the processes here are identical, regardless of whether you're using the SharePoint solution approach or the newer add-in approach. All we need to do is go to the term store and deploy our term sets. Here we are working with 2 or 3 different term sets, IPSV in particular, and so we need to upload our taxonomies into the term store. We provide some tools that will do that for you. If you have those existing in XML formats or Excel spreadsheets or something else, then we can provide some tools to get your structures into the term store. And then we're going to want to work with Concept Taxonomy Manager, because this allows us to create the auto classification rules that decide which terms are going to be applied to each document. And we have a number of webcasts available that show you how to use Concept Taxonomy Manager. If you'd like to see how it works, you can find these on our website. And certainly, if you wish for a live demonstration, we're more than happy to do that. You can just contact us via the website. What I want to point out here is that in addition to the taxonomy structure, we see on the left-hand side we have a set of rules for each term. In this case, a set of vocabulary that allows us to recognize what the document is about. In this case, climate and weather. But if we go back to the term store, we can see that not only is the data structure in the term store, but actually the classification rules are in there as well, stored as custom properties. And crucially, this is the only place this data is stored. We don't replicate this information onto the concept searching server, because if we did that, we would have duplicate data. Then we'd have to worry about data integrity and synchronizing 2 sets of data. But we completely avoid these types of problems by storing the data in the SharePoint term store and only in the SharePoint term store. And that's true whether we're talking about on-premise implementation or, as in this case, an Office 365 implementation. All right, and then once I have deployed my taxonomy structures and configured my rules in Concept Taxonomy Manager, then of course I need to create some site columns to receive the metadata in SharePoint. The site columns can be called anything we want, but they're going to be of type managed metadata. And note that we use the standard metadata property type, not some custom version built on top of the managed metadata property type. And that ensures consistency, both within the standard SharePoint environment as well as with any other add-ons from third parties you might be using. And by using the standard managed metadata property type, we ensure compatibility with all of your other SharePoint code. And we can configure these site columns any way we want to. We can allow multiple values or not, as we wish. We can select which term set is tied to the site column. We could even choose a non-root entry if we wanted to, so that the site column was based on a subsection of the root. But here we're going to choose the parent, and we can do things like set default values and so on if we want to. Any of the settings here are completely valid. And then once we've configured our site columns, we simply need to tell Concept Searching which taxonomies it should take control of. So we can have any number of term sets and site columns configured. We simply use the checkboxes here to tell Concept Searching which ones we want to be auto-populated. And these are the only ones that Concept Searching will then write to. So very straightforward to configure. Most of the configuration is done using standard SharePoint functionality in the term store, in configuring site columns, in deploying those site columns, using the content type hub if we want to. And then when we're finished, as I said, we just tell concept searching which site columns and which term sets it should take control of. We'll finish up by showing screenshots that outline the document uploading process, and we will see the end results. All right, we drag and drop a few documents into this location here. And you can see that I've dragged a few documents. And what you're seeing now is that the documents are not auto-classified during the bulk upload. And that's because if we tried to do that, it would slow down the bulk upload. We could potentially have timeouts in a synchronous operation like that if a lot of users were bulk uploading simultaneously. But we avoid all those issues by doing it asynchronously. And what we do is we use event receivers to notify the concept searching server when documents are added or edited or deleted in the SharePoint environment. As a result, we can step in and auto-classify documents very quickly, usually within literally a minute or two of the documents being uploaded. Now, the initial processing does include fetching the documents from SharePoint, converting them, getting the text out, classifying them, and pushing the metadata back in. And that can take a while when we first crawl your SharePoint farm, especially if you have hundreds of thousands or even millions of documents. But as you add documents on a day-to-day basis, it's very easy to keep up in real time or very near real time. So in 2 to 3 minutes, concept searching processes those documents, and once we refresh our browser, we see that the metadata has been applied automatically. And now we can see that in each case, concept searching has decided which of the terms from the IPSV, the enterprise, and the workflow term sets are applicable to each document. So that's it. The same functionality that we've been offering for many years now in the SharePoint environment, but using a different type of technology, a different kind of plumbing, if you will, so that we can eliminate the full solution of the sandbox solution and replace it with the SharePoint add-in as per Microsoft's long-term technology strategy. But the functionality is exactly the same as it has been for many years. All right, to summarize the benefits. Speed of processing in SharePoint on-premise environment and SharePoint Online is significantly faster. Add-ins require no SharePoint resources, representing a major advantage, specifically in the SharePoint Online environment. Requires less configuration as SharePoint sources, and does not require user credentials to be defined. Rapid implementation and ease of management by subject matter experts or IT teams. Preserving the modified username and date, although this is actually, that's functionality that is available in the SharePoint, rather in the concept searching premise version, as well as the add-in version. And finally, supports diverse environments, so not tied to SharePoint specifically. All right, time for some questions. Let's take a look here. Okay, so question here. Have you produced a low-cost solution for individual users of Office 365 E3 subscription with metadata management in TermStore? Sorry to say no, we have not. And I'm also going to say we're unlikely to do this. I think it would be cost prohibitive. Probably just wouldn't be able to produce a low-cost solution. And really it would be hard to justify because I don't think we really see this need in the market at this point. And really, you know, end users, we kind of don't want end users tagging documents with metadata. They don't do it, the system does it. And so, which eliminates end user tagging to begin with. All right, what are the fewest clicks to get a document record into the SharePoint repository that provide classification of that information? Answer is there are no additional clicks required. Auto classification happens automatically, and no additional mouse actions or keystrokes are required. So this is the case regardless of the upload method. All right, could Delve and SharePoint Search deliver some of the features in Concept Search? No. Neither Delve nor Microsoft Search will populate managed metadata properties assigned to SharePoint documents and list items. This is what conceptClassifier for SharePoint does. Now, if you choose not to use SharePoint or don't want to use managed metadata properties, you could use our enterprise product Concept Search to achieve equality with Delve or SharePoint as a search engine. It is platform agnostic, but not designed solely for SharePoint as conceptClassifier is. The issue with Delve and SharePoint Search, if you're using the term store without any ancillary tools, you'd be manually or devising a semi-manual process to populate the term sets, as there is no integration between the two. With regard to search functionality right now, we don't know what Delve and SharePoint will deliver, as Microsoft has not made public the ins and outs, features, or functionality. I'm just going to do one more question here, which is, I'd like specifically to know if and how add-ins are impacted by Microsoft's cloud-based updates, which happen frequently. And the answer is Microsoft updates will have no impact on our add-in. That is one of the advantages of an add-in. They're also portable and platform agnostic, so if you change platforms, the add-in would still work. All right, I guess I've talked a little faster than I anticipated, so we're finishing up a little earlier. Just would like to also just add that if you do want to download a PDF of the presentation, there will be case studies, because I think organizations always like to know how other organizations are using the concept searching solution to improve information governance, and so that is available at the back of the presentation. So thank you very much for attending again. Everyone have a great rest of the day, and please join us for our next webinar, which will take place next month. Thanks, everyone.